There is a giant in your life right now, and there's a real chance you're fighting the wrong one. Not the obstacle in front of you. The one your mind keeps returning to instead. But the real answer is found in this powerful thought. The story of David and Goliath was never really about courage against size. It was about which threat actually deserves your attention, and how easily we get that wrong. You know the shape of the story. An army stands frozen across a valley from the Philistines for 40 days, paralyzed by one enormous soldier who challenges anyone to single combat. Nobody moves. A shepherd boy, too young to even be a soldier, walks in with no armor, a sling, and 5 smooth stones, and ends the standoff in minutes. Most retellings stop at the stone. Small versus big, underdog wins, moral delivered. But the part that actually explains something about you isn't the fight. It's the 40 days before it. Why did an entire trained army freeze for 40 days? Not because Goliath was unbeatable. Soldiers have killed larger men before and since. They froze because fear doesn't calculate probability. It calculates size. And once a threat is large enough, visible enough, loud enough, the brain stops asking whether it can actually be beaten and starts treating it as a fixed feature of reality instead of a problem with a solution. Neuroscientist Joseph LeDoux, who has spent decades at NYU studying how the brain processes fear, found that the amygdala, the small almond-shaped structure responsible for triggering fear responses, reacts to a threat size and immediacy long before the slower, more rational parts of the brain get a chance to evaluate whether the fear is proportionate. Your brain sees big and loud and assumes dangerous, sometimes correctly, sometimes not, but always fast, and always before you've had a say in the matter. That's the army in the valley. 40 days of watching Goliath shout across the battlefield, and every single day the fear compounded instead of faded, because nobody engaged with the actual threat. They just kept staring at its size. Think about what that means for you. The difficult conversation you've been avoiding for months, not because it's actually dangerous, but because you've stared at it so long it's grown in your mind past what it really is. The career risk you keep talking yourself out of. The relationship problem that gets bigger every day you don't address it, not because the problem changed, but because your imagination kept adding armor to it. Here's the twist the story makes, and it's easy to miss under all the drama of the stone and the sling. David doesn't fight Goliath the way the army was afraid of. He refuses the king's armor when it's offered to him. He doesn't try to become a bigger, more heavily equipped version of the giant standing across from him. He goes in with the tools he already knows how to use, the ones he's practiced for years protecting sheep from actual predators. This detail matters more than it looks like it does. David wasn't being reckless. He was being accurate. He'd already fought threats before, lions and bears that came for his flock, and he understood something the frozen army didn't. A threat this large usually has exactly one exploitable weakness, and most of the danger in facing it comes from imagining it has none. Psychologist Martin Seligman, known for his research on what he called learned helplessness at the University of Pennsylvania, found something that lines up almost exactly with what happened in that valley. When people or animals are repeatedly exposed to a threat they believe they cannot control, they eventually stop trying to act, even once the situation changes and action would actually work. The paralysis outlives the original danger. It becomes a habit of the mind rather than an accurate read of the moment. 40 days is exactly enough time to manufacture that kind of helplessness in an entire army. Every day of inaction wasn't neutral. It was reinforcing the belief that nothing could be done, making the 40th day of paralysis easier to fall into than the first. David hadn't been in the valley for 40 days. That's the part that makes his response possible. He wasn't infected by the accumulated helplessness. He looked at the actual threat with fresh eyes and asked a different question than everyone else had been asking. Not how do I become big enough to survive this, but what does this specific threat actually require? This is where the modern mirror gets uncomfortable. The giant you've been staring at for months, maybe years, might not even be the real threat anymore. It might be the fear itself, grown large from repetition, outlasting whatever originally made it dangerous. You've been in your own valley long enough that the size of the problem in your head and the size of the problem in reality have quietly stopped matching. This is also where people misread the story the most. They think the lesson is be brave and attack big things. But David wasn't brave in some abstract, general sense. He was specific. He assessed one particular giant with one particular weakness, using tools he'd already proven worked, and he ignored every voice around him insisting he needed to be bigger, more armored, more like the giant himself in order to win. That's the real reframe. You don't beat an oversized fear by matching its size. You beat it by refusing to accept its size as accurate in the first place, and then acting with whatever precise, practiced tool you already have, instead of waiting until you feel like a giant yourself. The soldiers in the valley were waiting to feel ready. David never waited to feel ready. He simply picked up 5 stones, walked forward, and let the actual size of the problem reveal itself once someone finally engaged with it instead of staring at it. There's another detail worth sitting with. David picked up 5 stones, not 1. He wasn't naive about the possibility of missing. He wasn't performing certainty he didn't feel. He prepared for the realistic chance that his first attempt wouldn't land, and he walked forward anyway. That's a very different posture than either the paralysis of the army or the reckless bravado people often mistake this story for. It's neither frozen caution nor blind confidence. It's calculated readiness to try, fail if necessary, and try again, without treating a single miss as proof the whole plan was wrong. Compare that to how most people approach the giant they've been avoiding. They wait for a plan so airtight that failure becomes impossible, which means they wait forever, because no plan involving another person or an uncertain outcome is ever airtight. David's 5 stones suggest something more useful than a guarantee. They suggest permission to be wrong once or twice, and to keep moving anyway. There's also something worth noticing about who didn't stop David. His brothers mocked him for even showing up, assuming he'd wandered over out of curiosity rather than conviction. King Saul offered his own armor, essentially telling David the only way to survive was to become a smaller version of what everyone else already believed was necessary. David tried the armor on, felt how wrong it was for how he actually moved, and took it off. He didn't override his own read of the situation because someone more senior offered a version of confidence that wasn't actually his. This is worth pausing on, because it's the part most people skip when they're staring at their own giant. Somebody in your life has probably already handed you their version of the armor. Their strategy, their timeline, their idea of what bravery is supposed to look like when you finally face the thing you've been avoiding. It might even come from someone with good intentions and real experience. But if it doesn't fit, the way you actually move through the world, wearing it anyway, doesn't make you safer. It just makes you slower and less like yourself at the exact moment you need to be most like yourself. David's decision to remove the armor wasn't rebellion for its own sake. It was accuracy. He knew what tool matched his own trained instincts, and he trusted that over borrowed confidence that looked more impressive but fit worse. So think again about the giant you've been standing across from. The conversation you keep rehearsing but never having. The decision that's grown bigger every day you postponed it. The version of the problem that exists mostly because nobody has walked toward it yet to find out what it actually is. There is a giant in your life right now, and there's a real chance you're fighting the wrong one. Maybe the only way to find out is to finally stop staring across the valley and walk forward with the stones you already have.